Is this not rolling? There we go. Hey guys, how you doing? Sorry, I'm just getting in this thing. Been having trouble being able to view it. Let me just shut this down. There we go. All right. Nick, Monica, how are you guys today? Hope you're doing well. There we go. Been kind of a pain getting in here this morning or this afternoon. Hey, Maul, how are you? Luke, what's going on, man? Glad you guys are here. I know we only got a couple more, couple more of these content reviews coming up, today and Friday. And then on, let me think, on Monday, we'll start the process of just dealing with writing is what the plan is right now. So that's where we're headed here. So hopefully, we're getting everything all taken care of. What's up, Babesh? How are you today? Doing all right? I know I got crazy hair going on today, it looks like. But I don't know, didn't you guys see the Blue Angels fly over today? I didn't see it. I saw them from a distance, but other than that, I didn't see any direct flyovers. So hopefully you saw them today. That's kind of cool that they did that. Hey, Cameron, Jace, how are you guys today? Again, thank you for being here. I know you don't have to be. I do appreciate, all of you taking time and being concerned about the test, which is 2 weeks from tomorrow. 2 weeks. Can't believe it's already here. Can't believe we haven't seen each other since, what was it, Friday, March 5th? Something like that. Holy cow. That's just crazy. Crazy. Just thinking about how long we have been out so far. So, they shook your house? Luke, that's cool. That's awesome that they did. Well, I know. I didn't even see them either, Bavech. I didn't even hear them, which is really, really weird. But that's cool that you saw him, Luke. That you saw him. Eric, what's up, man? What's scary? That the test is 2 weeks away, or the Blue Angels flew over your house? Okay, I'm going to give it about another minute or so, and then I'm going to get going today. Going to cover 3 sections today. We're dealing with imperialism. So, and this will end, today and Friday will end our content piece. So, hey, Anjane, how are you? Eric, the test is kind of scary, but you know what? If you are writing and you're looking over DBQs and you're allowing me to score some stuff, then it doesn't need to be scary because we have been practicing for 4 weeks already. We've just written DBQ number 4 the other day, which is awesome. So I need you guys to take care of that for me, please. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It is 2:05, I think. Yes, 2:05 by my computer here. I'm going to go ahead and get into my notes, and we're going to get going here. All right, so today we're going to deal with imperialism for the most part. And this first thing we're going to take a look at is why. Why do countries imperialize? All right. So what ideologies contributed to the development of imperialism in this time period? We have to take a look at, the ideas, the reasons why countries decided they need to go over and economically, sometimes politically dominate a weaker nation. All right. So Europeans had some of the things they believed in for why they colonized, nationalism, spreading their belief system, spreading their empires, a desire for economic wealth. They wanted to become powerful. If you have more money than the next guy, that means you're more powerful. It was also their religious duty as well. The belief that they were biologically superior. All right, so those are all different reasons for imperializing. With this strong sense of identity and loyalty to the state, many world powers asserted their dominance, their authority over other territories. And they built empires in Asia and in Africa. That is a way that a country could assert its national identity in this global arena here. All right, European nationalism is huge here. After Great Britain lost its colonies in North America, they began looking elsewhere. They looked into Australia. They took control of India by 1857 and several other areas in Southeast Asia. France. They were big players in Southeast Asia and Northern and Western Africa. My students that are from Vietnam, it's due to the French that you're probably Catholic. It is because of their cultural and their religious influence on Vietnam in this era that's the reason why your family is Catholic, okay? Italy and Germany were newcomers here, and Spain was beginning to lose its influence here. Spain was very, very powerful. Portugal was very, very powerful after, in the early or in the mid to late 15th century into the 16th century, but they begin to lose their influence in this, what we call the second wave of, colonization here. Now, Japan also begins to flex its muscle here as well. They begin to move into Korea. They defeat the Chinese in the Sino-Japanese War in 1894 and 95. This gave the Japanese control of the Korean Peninsula. And then eventually they would take over Formosa, which is present-day Taiwan, and they held this until the end of World War II. Now remember that the Japanese had been isolationists for such a long time until, Commodore Matthew Perry came in and you had the Meiji Restoration, and they understood that they didn't want the same thing to happen to them as what was going on in China. So they begin to flex their muscle as well, and they begin to move into other areas of the world, and mostly it's going to be in the Pacific Ocean, the South Pacific, and then, of course, on the Asian continent, Korea, and then by the 1930s, we're going to see them move into China as well. Racial ideologies, was huge with imperialism, and the misuse of science here. Colonial powers believed that they were inherently superior to those that they colonized, to those that they had subjugated here. Phrenologist studies, the study of the head and the shape of, the skull. They would measure the size and the shapes of skulls, and they said the smaller skull proved that others, such as Africans, indigenous Americans, and Asians, that they were inferior, all right? And, we know that's not true, of course. But the whole thing is that these European phrenologists, these American phrenologists of the 19th century and the early 20th century were out there measuring heads of people, saying, you are intellectually inferior to me because of the shape and the size of your head. Things like that. People actually believed in that. And this is the time that Charles Darwin, took his ship, the HMS Beagle, down to the Galapagos Islands and begins to formulate his theory of natural the theory of natural selection. The strongest will survive, and he took a look at turtles, and his primary study were the finches of the Galapagos Islands. And he stated that natural selection takes place over millions of years, and due to that natural selection, it weeds out the inferior species, the weaker in species. Well, guess what? The Europeans, Caucasians, whites, grab a hold of this idea, and they came up with the idea of social Darwinism as well. And they use social Darwinism and saying, hey, look, we are superior to you, inferior species, such as the inferior races, such as those in Africa or in Asia, because of this, that, and another. We are biologically superior here. Look at us, we are the strongest in the world, so therefore we are superior. So this is another reason that justifies European imperialism with European and, I hate to say it, with, America as well, the United States. Another reason for it is to spread their culture, all right? Integrate their own language onto the people they subjugated. They introduced political and educational ideas, and religion, of course. And you guys all know, and I talk about it in class, where you have several of your peers in class that are from Africa, or their family is from Africa, and these students speak 2 or 3 different languages. They speak Swahili, they speak French, they speak English. It is because of the Europeans coming into those areas of the world and telling them, no, you can't speak Swahili anymore, you cannot speak whatever local language you have to learn French, you have to learn English, you have to learn German, where, depending on who the colonist was at the time. So we push Europeans, when I say we, I'm saying they push their culture onto these indigenous natives, Native Americans. We're going to see Africans and Asians as well. And then missionaries set up religious schools to teach Christianity. Wanted to give them a traditional belief system here, such as they wanted to get rid, they wanted them to get rid of traditional belief systems such as ancestor veneration. That's not a Christian belief. So they says, no, you cannot practice that anymore. Here is Christianity. It is the best religion there is. So therefore, you should, believe in it just as we do. And I don't want to completely, throw religion under the bus here, especially Christianity, because they did do some good things, okay? They helped bring medicine into these areas, medical care, they built hospitals, a guy who was a missionary. His name was David Livingstone. He worked to end the illegal slave trade in Africa as well. So there are some good things that come out of it, but which weighs more, the good things or the bad things? And that's up for you to determine here. I'm not going to tell you one way or another. I'm just going to say that you have these good things and you have these bad things, and you have to answer questions sometimes based on those negative or positive things as well. All right. Also, there were economic motives. Okay. It's all about money. All right. Treaties were established to set up these trading forts and protect their interests. Countries competed with one another. The English monarch granted the East India Company a royal charter in 1600, giving it a monopoly on trade in India, cotton, silk, indigo, and then of course it would move into Asia, and then the whole opium thing would come about in here. The Dutch East India Corporation, they did the same. They controlled a lot of Southeast Asia here. So at this point, Britain becomes the most powerful trading empire in the world. All right. So as the Second Industrial Revolution begins to spread, other nations begin to challenge Great Britain in Asia, Africa, and Pacific to expand their markets and new resources for their factories and foods for their growing populations. All right, so those are why people begin to imperialize. It's to spread culture, to spread religion, economic wealth, and basically just to flex your muscle here. Okay, so take a couple of moments here. I'll see if there's any questions over here, and then we'll get started on 6.2 here in a moment. No, Anjane. It's associated with Japan. It's associated with the United States. It's associated with, other European nations. Imperialism is the idea that one nation economically or politically dominates another nation. So if you can find a nation that's doing that, it doesn't have to be European. The Europeans were the biggest and the baddest at the time, but of course Japan is definitely involved in this, and the United States is involved with this as well. Yeah, Daniel, you're right. All that stuff is correct there. All right. Okay, let me set up my next PowerPoint here, and then we will, let me see, state expansion. I think this is it. Yep. All right. I need to turn on a ceiling fan here. It's getting kind of warm. I like the new background of the PowerPoint. Hey, I switched them all. For every unit, there was a different background for the PowerPoint. Thank you for noticing, Jace. I appreciated it. All right, let's get going on 6.2 here with state expansion. Okay, what we have to keep in mind that European governments, the United States, Russia, and Japan continue to expand at this time. Of course, with the discovery of quinine, which is a medicine that treats tropical diseases such as malaria, this will lead to further exploration of countries or continents such as Africa. It takes them off the coast for the first time and allows them to move into the interior. All right, so the British and Egypt here, they build what is called the Suez Canal. That is located right there. All right, and it connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. And they do this in 1869 with a French company here. It takes about 1.5 million Egyptians, known as corvée labor here. They're unpaid. Thousands are die over the 10-year period to build this canal. And what it does basically is, if you take a look at this map here, instead of going all the way around here, 12,300 miles to Mumbai, it cuts it basically almost in half. If you can just go this way, 7,200 miles as opposed to, 1,200 or 12,300 miles. So the Suez Canal speeds up transportation, saves a lot of money here, and along with this, the British are able to take control of Egypt from the Ottoman Empire here because of the Suez Canal. The British need to make sure that they control this area of the world. And then the British established colonies along the west coast of Africa, the Brits used diplomacy and warfare to establish its colonies. They just don't go in and they, say, hey, we want to take over. They sometimes use military force. Sometimes they set up treaties, and probably most of those treaties are unfair. The French at this time forced the Ottomans out of Algeria in Africa, and it becomes what they call a settler colony in 1870, where French citizens actually come into Algeria and they begin to set up homes there. Trading posts along the west coast of Africa are set up by the French as well. And the reason I put this map up here is just to show you the types of natural resources that Africa has to offer. I mean, it is full of natural resources here. And along with this comes what we call the European Scramble for Africa. This is part of what they call the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 1885. It is set up in Berlin by Otto von Bismarck in Germany. Now, he has no real interest in colonization, but he does want to keep the peace in Europe. He understands that a stable Europe is to the benefit of all. So he decides that, hey, we need to have some sort of a plan where we can decide who gets what. So they all gather together in Berlin, and of course no African nations or African leaders are there to make this decision for them. And the Europeans, divide up Africa with, no thought of long unified society. So just imagine that if, Mr. Hadley decided to divide Fossil Ridge up based on where people sat in the commons for lunch, and he just drew these meandering lines and said, okay, this is one section, this is one section, this is one section. Who knows? Your friends and your family might be on the other side and you're split up, that type of thing. That is what happens in Africa as well. All right? Now, the one area that we need to take a look at, of course, and we talked about this in class quite a bit, is the Congo. All right? Belgian King Leopold II personally owned this colony. It was not controlled by the government of Belgium, because if the government of Belgium really knew what King Leopold was doing here, it probably would have stopped it. It was called the Congo Free State. It was owned by King Leopold here. It profited $1.1 billion for the country of Belgium. So even though the Belgian government did not own it or was not a part of it, they definitely benefited from this. And of course, as we talked about in class, King Leopold, treated the Congolese as slaves. It was very horrific. Severed hands to terrorize the Congolese into submission. Many beaten to death. They couldn't meet their quota. Basically, 8 million people died under the rule of Leopold, all in the search for natural resources. And of course, the biggest natural resource coming out of the Congo at the time was rubber here that was needed in factories. But by 1908, the Belgian government took control of the Congo, took it away from King Leopold after all these atrocities started coming out, and conditions did improve. All right. So by 1900, only 2 countries in Africa had not been imperialized, and that is present-day Ethiopia. Italy tried to conquer it, but failed in 1895, and Liberia, which was a country founded by formerly enslaved people in the United States. They had a dependent relationship on the United States, but they were not imperialized by the United States. But then when you think about it, they were still not technically fully independent because of their huge dependency on the United States at this time. All right. The Portuguese and the French and British competed for control of the Indian spice areas, okay, and the minerals and the gems that come out of it. Portugal only stayed on the coast of these areas. They never really ventured inside to set up colonies. The French lost a lot of their holdings due to the French Indian War, or the 7 Years' War between 1756 and 1763. And so steadily, the British and the East India Company encroached upon the territories here of the old Mughal Empire. They made their way inward, and they recruited Indian soldiers known as sepoys to join the British colonial army. So the British eventually, due to technology, due to better firepower and things of that nature, are able to take control totally of the Indian subcontinent. Now, China did not experience imperialism like the rest of the world. And when I say the rest of the world, I mean South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa here, okay? China is able to maintain some sort of independence. Now, I'm not saying that they were totally not influenced by Western nations, and you guys know that, of course. It was maintained through it. They maintained their independence, but they were economically dominated by Europeans here, and of course we all know that due to the spheres of influence here. As a result, the Europeans had superior military technology, and they were able to carve out these spheres of influence. And due to internal problems in Asia, it made it a lot easier for Europeans to take control. You have famine, you have the Yellow River changing course, you have drought, you have the Taiping Rebellion, so you have starving peasants needing food, workers and miners stage, these rebellions, so you have a lot of internal problems. They're trying to overthrow the Qing dynasty, and the Europeans are able to come in and help the Qing dynasty and able to take control again by the mid to late 19th century in the 1860s, and that just cements in European influence in the Qing dynasty, even though the Qing dynasty does try to set up the self-strengthening movement to make China for China, but at the end of the day, they're really not able to do that. Due to this, the Taiping Rebellion here, close to 20 million people die due to war, due to starvation, and of course, disease here. All right. And again, China is not in the best of shape here. We have another rebellion called the Boxer Rebellion. They begin to attack Chinese Christians and Western missionaries. The Empress Gigi at the time encourages the Boxers, and she wants all foreigners out of her country or to be killed for that matter. And another 100,000 Chinese died or were killed during this, and they were mostly Chinese Christians. Only 250 foreigners were killed during this time period of the Boxer Rebellion. And the Qing dynasty here suffers another humiliating defeat because Western powers, again, had to come in and clean up the mess that was being created here. So this influence that Westerners had in China continues to erode Chinese legitimacy and sovereignty, at the time. Japan after industrialization begins to imperialize places in China. They go into Korea, they go into Southeast Asia, and they go into the Pacific Islands. Japanese government encourages agriculture workers to take seasonal contract work on places like Hawaii and Guam. In 1893, they set up this thing called the Colonization Society of Japan, where it is a government-sponsored emigration program, move to other areas of the world, and they plan to establish colonies in Latin America and Mexico, but it really does not, is really not that successful. The Dutch control the West Indies. They control the Spice Islands. The Europeans want their nutmeg, they want their cinnamon, they want their, exotic spices that they can't grow in Europe. So the Dutch take over those portions of the world. The French colonizes Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos for cash crops. The British go into Singapore and the Malay Peninsula and modern day Thailand, or Siam, was the only Southeast Asian country not to be colonized. They had diplomatic relations with the French and the British. They had reforms, much like the Meiji Restoration in Japan. They began to industrialize. They have Western-style schools, and they had a pretty efficient government bureaucracy. So not all of Southeast Asia was colonized. You have places like Thailand, or at this day, in this present, when we're talking about in this time period, it was called Siam, S-I-A-M. Very, very simple. But it is present-day Thailand. So if it comes up in it is right here, by the way, if it comes up in an essay of some sort, you could say Thailand and you would, be okay with that. All right, let's take a look at Australia and New Zealand. All right, the British set up a penal colony in Australia. All right, that's what Australia was basically used for very early on. The first convicts were sent to Australia in 1788, and this is what the continent was used for decades. You had 19 crimes, okay? And if you take a look at some of these crimes that you were sent to Australia for, they're kind of small. I like number 15 down here, clandestine marriage. I don't even know what a clandestine marriage is. So, they're sent there for the strangest reason. Watermen carrying too many passengers on the Thames River, if any drowned, stealing clothing, highway robbery, prostitution. Okay, so that is why if you committed any of these 19 crimes, you would be sent to Australia. All right, so by the 1830s, after it was originally set up as a penal colony, it was discovered that you could raise sheep there and produce, some of the finest wool in the world. There was also copper mines. And they discovered gold there as well. So Australia becomes a huge area to get natural resources. 1839, New Zealand is annexed into the British Empire, and it became a producer of food, sheep grazing and dairy farming, and they provide food for Australian settlers here. All right, let's take a look at U.S. imperialism because, we don't want to be left out of the picture yet. The United States, forces indigenous peoples off their land, onto the reservations into Oklahoma, just right north of here. It was a forced migration. It was known as the Trail of Tears. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Native Americans died on this trek from Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and that area, all the way to Oklahoma. All right. In 1823, the Monroe Doctrine was instituted, basically saying, hey, Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. We're going to take care of it for ourselves. All right. And we have the idea of manifest destiny, that any land on the North American continent is up for grabs. It is our right as Americans to go and take this land, to use this land to farm, to industrialize, whatever. It is God-given right. It is our destiny to do this. That is what Americans were taught, and that's what Americans did. We expand into the Pacific Ocean. We the United States overthrow a constitutional monarchy in Hawaii, all right, in 1895 to make sure that American fruit companies, such as the Dole Fruit Company, can grow pineapples and other types of fruits there without interference from the Hawaiian government. So with the help of the U.S. military, business owners are able to overthrow the constitutional monarchy in Hawaii. And victory in the Spanish-American War give the United States places like the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Cuba as part of the U.S. empire as well. And then, of course, you have, Teddy Roosevelt. This is something that you'll get more into next year in APUSH. The Roosevelt Corollary says that it is our duty as the United States to intervene if there is any instability in Latin America. It is up to us to go in and fix it. It is up to us to go in and have a huge influence there. Then you have Russia. So starting with Catherine the Great, Russia expands, into Poland, right here, all the way across to the Pacific Ocean. All right. Merchants sponsor trips to Alaska. They explore the west coast of California. They even set up a place called Fort Ross. They abandon it in 1839, and then they eventually sell Alaska to the United States in 1867. They eventually push into Central Asia as well. They compete with Great Britain in this area of the Ottoman Empire. They push into Afghanistan, and this rivalry between Great Britain and Russia becomes what is known as the Great Game, because they're constantly vying for control of areas in this part of the world. All right, so that finishes up 6.2. Let's take a look at 6.3 here in a few moments. It's shorter than this one. It's probably about as long as the first one, and we'll finish up here real shortly. It's a secretive marriage, yeah. That is so weird. Clandestine marriage. Oh, so Anjane, you're from Liberia? Very cool. If people wanted to go to America, just break one of the 19 crimes. That's to go to Australia, Bhavesh, not to America. All right? The penal colony was in Australia, not America. All right, let me close this one down. Yeah, hey, just so you know, kind of cool. If you go into the wine section of your local grocery store, especially Kroger, there is a wine called 19 Crimes. All right, and they have different labels on them about it. It'll tell you a little bit about the crime that sent people to Australia. I think it's actually an Australian wine, but it's called 19 Crimes, and it's pretty interesting. All right. Okay. Hopefully, maybe I'll see some of you tomorrow night. Apparently, there is a where teachers are driving down Thompson Avenue or Thompson Drive, whatever it's called, teachers are going to be in their cars waving at students, that type of thing. I don't know. It's from 6 to 7 tomorrow night, I guess. So hopefully I'll see some of you. So maybe we'll see each other tomorrow night. Okay? So keep that in mind. I see Mr. Klaus is a wine connoisseur. I am not a wine connoisseur, okay? But it's just interesting, I think. All right, let's get into the last one, and we will call it a day. This is Indigenous Responses to State Expansion. Okay, let's get going here. So, not everybody took imperialism lying down, okay? They just didn't see these Europeans coming over and says, okay, I give up. You're going to take over my country. You're going to take over my tribe, whatever. Go ahead and do it. No, there was a lot of pushback on this state expansion here. So the question is how and why did internal and external factors influence state building between 1750 and 1900? So under European imperialism, many of the colonies began to experience a strong sense of nationalism here. Many people begin to have experience of Western-style education. And Western-style education at this time was teaching about enlightenment, the rights of man, blah, 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 blah. So they were teaching these people of these new nations that they were taking over about enlightenment ideas, that everyone should be treated equally. So that's going to begin to filter down into some, movers and shakers of this time period. And many that were taught this Western style education would use this knowledge to drive out their colonizers in the 20th century. And again, remember, the 20th century isn't something that we have to really be concerned about, especially for the test, but it's something that you should know about, that you could potentially use as, contextualization here. This is the Balkan Peninsula here. It's under control of the Ottoman Empire, and we begin to see some nationalist movements here. They begin to surface in places such as Serbia and Greece. And each one of these areas of the world, Serbia here, we have Greece here, they gained their independence from the Ottoman Empire by 1832. And of course, as we know, if we take a look at this area right here, we know this huge nationalist movement would definitely push us towards World War I. This is the hotbed. This is where World War I basically started. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens in the United States. Before the Revolutionary War here, the British issue what is called the Proclamation Act of 1763. Basically, it says all of this land right here, just east of the Mississippi River, hey, there's the great state of Iowa, go Hawkeyes, right there. Here, in this color here, whatever that color is, basically is reserving all land for Native Americans. So any Native Americans that live in this area of the world were forced into this area. All right? That was set up by the British government. Well, of course, we have the Revolutionary War in 1776, and the United States becomes a country of its own. Well, they're not just staying here on the East Coast. Colonists are beginning to push this way. So do you think they're going to live with the Native Americans there? Absolutely not. And they begin to force the Native Americans off their land here, which will thus begin the Trail of Tears and, move towards Oklahoma. So how did Native Americans resist here? All right. So the Cherokees, they established their own nation in 1839. September 6th, 1839 is the official date of the Cherokee Nation being set up. Now, the idea was to assimilate to white settler culture. They adopted colonial farming, weaving, and building. They developed a written language, which was unheard of and unseen at this time in Native American cultures there. So before long, most of the Cherokee Nation was literate, and the Cherokee Nation adopted a constitution very similar to the United States. But once gold was discovered in this part of the world, Congress in 1839 passed what was called the Indian Removal Act, and they relocated many of these Cherokees and other Native Americans to the Oklahoma Territory. All right? In the northwestern part of the United States. And it would spread down the west coast as well and into Montana and those areas there. You have what is called the Native American ghost dance. And again, this is very, very important to understand that these Native Americans just did not give up. They tried to fight back. This ghost dance was a ritual, a ceremony that was performed by Native Americans that they would ask for the dead, their ancestors, to come back and remove the white settlers from their land and restore traditions, and this began in 1869. And it did spread all the way to the Missouri River. So just, they're, east of Nebraska. But the resistance, as we know, with a lot of these type of rituals and ceremonies, it doesn't work. And the resistance fell by 1890. So it takes about 20 years for this resistance to go away. And it was basically over in 1890 due to the Battle of Wounded Knee. Okay. Also, in Peru, and this says resistance rebellion in the United States, but we're going to go towards Latin America here. This is Tupac Amura II here. He had received a Jesuit education, which is a Catholic education. He was a hereditary chief. His family had long controlled portions of Peru. But in 1780, he was arrested and executed, he arrested and executed a colonial administrator for cruelty against his people. Of course, this would lead to revolt against the Spanish, and this revolt spread to Peru, to Bolivia, and Argentina. And by 1781, Tupac and his family were captured and arrested, and he was forced to watch his family, his wife, and his sons executed, and then he was tortured and executed. And this is a famous painting of Tupac being executed. This is what is being called drawn and quartered, where every part of his body is being torn apart by moving horses. All right, a very, very painful way to go here. Let's take a look at South Asian movements here. By the mid-19th century, Indian soldiers under British control made up most of the Indian colonial army. And, of course, as we know, in South Asia at the time, we have a mixture of Hindus and Muslims. And the rifle cartridges, the things that the bullets came in, were greased in animal fat, pigs and cows. Okay? Well, we know that Muslims think pigs are a dirty animal and they cannot, eat pork. Hindus believe that the cow is sacred, so they will not eat pork. So in order to open up these cartridges, the soldiers usually take it and they tear it open with their teeth. Well, then this animal fat gets into their mouth, which goes against their religion. All right? So they believed that the British were trying to convert them to Christianity by forcing them to tear open these cartridges with their mouths, or they greased them with animal fat. So they rebelled against it, and this is called a very famous rebellion. It's called the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857, or the Indian Rebellion, and it transfers to many, many different cities before the British are actually able to come in and crush it. So this marks the beginning of what we call Indian nationalism, but it's going to take a while for the Indians to really, grab control of their nation. It's not going to happen for about another 100 years. It doesn't happen until after World War II. So with the British knowing that these Sepoy soldiers have rebelled, they come in and they set up what is called the British Raj, where the colonial government now only takes orders from London itself. They do not have self-control in the colony. All right, the British take full control of India in about 1857, 1858, somewhere right around there. But again, this stirs nationalism, and by 1885, the Indian National Congress is formed, and they are to air grievances to the colonial government. But eventually, they would call for self-rule. They would say, they're not meeting our needs, they're not listening to our grievances, so basically we want to have control of our own area of the world. All right, so in Southeast Asia, we do see some resistance in Vietnam. From the start, the Vietnamese resisted the French, and this would continue up through the 20th century, and finally by like 1958, the French are gone out of Vietnam, and then of course by the 1960s, we have the whole idea of the Vietnam War. So in Vietnam, we see this continued continued resistance against European influences here. The Philippines, they resist Spanish rule, of course. Jose Rizal, he is European educated, and he started a reform movement in 1892. He was loyal to Spain, but he is arrested and executed. They just don't trust locals here. 1896, the Philippine Revolution breaks out. By 1898, you have the Spanish-American War. Many revolutionaries, Filipino revolutionaries, sided with the United States to get the Spanish out. But, they were expecting freedom at the end of this, but due to the Treaty of Paris to end the war, they just became subjugated by American imperialism. So they kick out the Spanish, and here come the Americans, basically the same type of rule there. So by the time the treaty was ratified in 1899, you have the Philippine-American War. Okay, it broke out. The United States eventually wins, of course. 20,000 Filipino troops were killed, along with about 200,000 civilians. Only 4,300 Americans died. 2/3 of those deaths were due to disease. And the Philippines remained a possession of the United States until 1946, when we gave it up at the end of World War II. Resistance in Australia as well. Australia was not free of people when the British came in and started to set up these penal colonies. The Aboriginal people in Australia have been in Australia for about 50,000 years. They've been around a long time. Originally, the government said, hey, we must treat Australian indigenous peoples kindly, but things change. The colonial government in Australia do not recognize the indigenous people's land rights. Since they were not British, they were forced off of their land, of course. Thousands were killed as they tried to defend their land. There is a great movie out there, maybe summer viewing. It's called Rabbit Proof Fence. It's the idea of how the British tried to take over culturally and politically in areas of Australia. It's a really good movie. I encourage you to watch it. It's called Rabbit Proof Fence. So many of the same things happened to the Maori people of New Zealand. The Treaty of Waitangi of 1840 was supposed to protect the rights of the Maori people, but a series of wars break out between the British and the Maori people, and by 1900, the Maori people had lost, or the Maori people had lost much of their land here. All right. In Africa, we see some resistance as well. You have the Xhosa people, Xhosa, again, Xhosa. They did not want to be ruled by Europeans, so at this time, some of the local cattle began dying due to disease. Probably this disease was spread due to British cattle that the British settlers had brought. So the Xhosa people began killing their own cattle and destroying crops in a belief that this would cause the spirits to rise and it would remove the British from their lands. Over 400,000 head of cattle were killed at the time. And of course, we all know what this is going to do. It's going to lead to famine. It's going to lead to the death of thousands of people. And then, of course, the British would remain. So there are various ways that indigenous people did fight back here. You have the ghost dance in the United States. You have the Xhosa cattle killing. You have Tupac Umare trying to fight back in various areas. You have the Spanish-American, or not the Spanish-American War, the Philippine-American War. But at the end of the day, Europeans, the United States, are far too powerful to fall, okay? These local indigenous peoples are going to be under the influence of European countries and the United States for the better part up until about the mid-20th century. All right, so that ends my lecture today. I hope you were able to get all that and stick with me here. Again, tomorrow I will assign multiple choice questions for Unit 6, and then on Friday we will finish out our lecture series for this time of quarantining. Okay, you guys take care. I love you. I miss you. I wish we could all get back together. Remember, the AP exam is only in